Today we're going to be roasting. Roasting is a dry heat cooking technique without fat. Now, there was a time before cooking was just a hobby when cooking was the order of the day and roasting was just what you did. Let's see if we can learn enough to get back to that place. Roasting happens by taking food and putting it into the oven, and it's actually hot air that circulates around the food that does the cooking. Now, hot air is not a great conductor of heat, it's a great insulator, and consequently, roasting is sort of a gentle way of cooking. If you're lucky enough to have a convection oven, there's a fan in the oven as well, which actually circulates hot air inside the oven and makes it a little bit more efficient. So if you do have a convection oven, just know that you can turn the temperature down 25 to 50 degrees and get the same results. So what kind of foods are appropriate for roasting? Well, I would say anything that's naturally tender is a great choice for roasting. So as an example, I'm going to be roasting vegetables today. I've got some potatoes, I've got some peppers. I'm also going to be roasting a chicken. So how do you choose a good chicken for roasting? Well, on one hand, you want the meat to be tender, and on the other hand, you want it old enough so that it's put on some fat. If I were to choose a Poussin at about 1.5 pounds, it would be very, very tender, but there would not be any fat on that bird. A little bit larger at about 2.5 to 3 pounds, you'll see a frying chicken, which is still tender, but doesn't have very much fat yet. And then magically, between 4 and 5 pounds, the chicken is large enough where it's still tender, but you start to see some fat. The skin will start to become yellow. And if you're lucky enough, you may be able to find a capon, which is a castrated rooster, much bigger, between 6 and 8 pounds. The meat is very tender, but there's a lot of fat which bastes that meat as it roasts. I have a roasting chicken here, so let's get started. I've washed this chicken and I've blotted it dry. I'm going to put it here on the cutting board, and before I move ahead, I want to season it on the inside with salt as well as a little bit of pepper. Now, in addition, I'm going to put some herbs on the inside. So here is a little bit of rosemary and a branch of thyme. I'll put that in. I'm also going to put in a little bit of vegetable matter. So in goes some onion and a carrot and maybe even a little piece of celery. Good. So the chicken is all ready to be roasted, save for the fact that it's all splayed out. If I were to roast it like this, the wingtips might burn, the legs might overcook because they're hanging out in space. So what we want is a chicken that's nice and tight like this. The way to accomplish that is to take the wings and tuck them behind the back of the chicken, almost like he's scratching his own back. And then bring the legs in tight, close to the breast, and take a piece of butcher's twine. I usually take a piece that's about 5 feet long. Take the center and go underneath this chicken and come up on either side of the legs, just like this. I'm going to cross that string and create some little cuffs for the ankles. So once again, cross the string and capture the ankles, just like that. And then I'm going to take the strings and cross again so that the string goes right between the crease that divides the breast from the leg. So you can see already I'm starting to get that nice tight conformation that I'm looking for. Then flip the bird over, and I want you to take the strings and sing this little song to yourself. Over the wings and under the neck to grandmother's house you go. And you use the neck almost like a little hitching post. And this chicken has a nice tight conformation. It's ready to be roasted, save for the fact that I want to season the outside as well. So salt and pepper, top and bottom. And we'll gather up all this salt and make sure that it goes on the bird. Now we need to put this into a pan to roast, and I have one right here, a roasting pan. We want one of the right size, neither too large or too small. If it's too small and too tight, there may not be the ability for heat to circulate around this chicken and cook it properly. If, on the other hand, the pan is too large, whatever else is in the pan may burn while this chicken roasts. So I have a nice pan here. The size is good, and I think some sort of rack that lifts the bird up off the bottom of the pan is appropriate. Here's what my rack is, a couple of pieces of celery, and I cut them to fit. We'll put the chicken right on top of that celery, and this is ready to go into the oven. Now I'm going to start this chicken at 450 degrees, relatively hot, because I want to start the process of browning the outside of that bird. About halfway through the cooking, and it's going to take an hour and 15 minutes or so, I'm going to check it, but the browning will have already started. I will turn the temperature down to about 375, and I'll introduce mirepoix, carrots, celery, and onions into the bottom of the pan so that they can cook along with the chicken. This will become the flavoring that gives us a really terrific gravy with that roasted chicken. Now, I'm going to take this cutting board away because it's had chicken on it, and we'll replace it with a clean one. I'm also going to wash my hands. I have some potatoes that I would like to roast, and I'm going to choose a different type of pan to roast these potatoes in. I'm going to choose a cast iron pan. And the beauty of the cast iron pan is that it distributes heat very, very evenly. I'm going to roast these potatoes in a fat that you may or may not have had before, duck fat. And it makes absolutely delicious potatoes. It lends a lot of flavor to the potatoes. What I have here is just some Yukon Gold potatoes. I've cut them in half. And as soon as this pan is hot, we'll add the oil, and then we'll get these potatoes into the oven as well. If the chicken is going to take about an hour and 15 minutes, these potatoes will take about 40 to 45 minutes. And I'm going to put them into a separate oven at about 425 degrees, and those can roast very, very happily. Once they're done, I'll take them out and get them out of the oil so that they don't sit in oil for too long and get soggy. But these will hold very nicely and can be reheated just before we eat our dinner. Now, in this particular case, I'm not going to put a rack on this pan to hold these potatoes above the fat because I actually want them to cook in the fat. So, no rack, a nice heavy pan. We'll get the fat hot, and then I'm going to add the potatoes. We'll season them with salt and pepper, and then we'll put them into the oven as well. The beauty of roasting is that once the food is in there, it's tremendously efficient. It doesn't require any of your attention except periodically opening the oven and seeing how things are coming along. It's very different from sautéing, which is a high heat cooking technique with fat that demands that you be there and on point all the time. All right, these potatoes are going to make their way into this oil. I'll spread them out. I want to be sure that these get seasoned as well with salt and pepper. And just a little bit more duck fat. If you don't have duck fat, you can certainly use oil, vegetable oil, olive oil, canola oil, all will work, but duck fat has a really wonderful flavor. A nice alternative might be to take a little bit of fat that you find in the cavity of your chicken and add it to the pan with the potatoes, along with some vegetable oil, and as it cooks, that fat will render and will flavor the potatoes. All right, these are going into the oven. at about 400 to 425 for 35 or 40 minutes. Another vegetable that I love to roast is peppers. And I've got some right here. I'll show you what we're going to do. First thing, I'm going to take the peppers and I want to divide them up into quarters. And if you cut right down where the crease is in the pepper, what you'll discover is that the ribs are waiting for you. They grow right where those creases are. And as you can see, I've gathered a nice selection of peppers here. And I'm going to put them into a roasting pan. If you can put them in one layer with their cup side up, that's exactly what you want. If you stack them too deeply, you can expect that they won't cook quite properly. They won't brown as well as you might like. So put them into the pan, one layer deep, and we're going to season them. First thing I'm going to do is put sliced garlic on these peppers, and I'm looking for 1 or 2 pieces in every little piece of pepper. And then I've got some anchovies that I've chopped up, and these lend a wonderful flavor, so don't even think about leaving them out. Just chop them fine and sprinkle them all over. This lends a wonderful savory flavor, but also some saltiness, and it marries beautifully with the flavor of these peppers. Next, I'm going to dot some butter on here, and each little piece of pepper should have a knob of butter, just a tiny little bit, that will melt and flavor these peppers. I'm going to put tomatoes that have been diced up and just sprinkle them over the peppers. These will roast along with the peppers and lend their juice to what's almost like a sauce in the bottom of the pan. Just a few pieces in each pepper. And then salt and pepper, and we'll get these into the oven as well. Salt and pepper. And I would say that these should go into the same 425-degree oven that the potatoes are in, and they will take about 35 minutes. You know, just a little bit of olive oil as well, I think, is well advised. They look a little bit dry to me, so I'm going to add olive oil along with the butter. There we are. Okay. While we're waiting, let me share with you a little bit about other things that you might consider roasting. Any sort of tender meat is entirely appropriate, so a pork loin would be great. A prime rib, which we'll cook a little bit later in the program, also great. Turkey works wonders in an oven as a roasted piece of meat. All manner of vegetables. Certainly, baking is roasting. It's just what bakers call it. We're not going to get mixed up in doing too much baking, but it is dry heat cooking without fat. Let me walk you quickly through what's going to happen when this chicken comes out. As I said, about halfway through, I'm going to turn the temperature down. Once I see browning beginning, and I'm going to add this mirepoix to the roasting pan. And it will cook right along with the chicken so that when I go to make my gravy, it will have the flavor of these vegetables. Now that this bird has been in the oven for about a half an hour, I'm going to add the mirepoix to the pan. As you can see, it's already begun browning. And I just want to sprinkle these vegetables around the outside of the bird. That way they can cook as the chicken cooks. All right, I've added the mirepoix to the pan. I turned the oven down just a little bit to about 375, and in a half an hour we should have a chicken that is perfectly cooked. Okay, our chicken is done. Now, there's a couple of different ways of evaluating doneness. One might be to flip through a cookbook and find a chart that tells you for this many pounds at this temperature, cook for this long. Those aren't really great charts. They give you guidelines, but they don't give you specifics. You can touch this bird, but it's a little bit difficult when you have a bird that's this big to find out what's going on inside. Some people will tip the juices out And when the juices run clear from the cavity, that means that the bird is done. But oftentimes that will lead to a bird that is overcooked. What I like to do is use a thermometer. And this thermometer is stuck into the thickest part of the flesh, protected from the heat, which is the inside of the leg here. I don't want it to touch fat. I don't want it to touch bone. And I want the temperature to be right around 165 to 170 degrees. If you look at this, I have it at about 168.5, which I would say is ideal. As this chicken sits here in the pan, it will continue to cook. There's a certain amount of energy trapped in this bird that it absorbed from the oven. Now that it's out of the oven, that energy has to go somewhere. Some of it will pass off into the cool room, but some of it will carry on to the center of this bird where it is likewise cool and continue to cook. So you can expect carryover cooking of about 5 to 10 degrees even. I've just noticed, for instance, that this has climbed up a degree while I was sitting here talking, and that will carry on. I'm going to take this bird out of the roasting pan so I can make a gravy from what's left in the pan and give this chicken a chance to rest. And what that means is that the heat will dissipate, the pressure that's inherent on the inside of that meat, sort of pushing on the juices, will subside, and the juices will flow back to where they belong. If you've ever had the experience of carving a chicken or a turkey too soon, you make that first cut and the juices just flow everywhere. And if we can agree that we like juicy chicken, then what you've done is just shot yourself in the foot. That's not what you want to do. So I'm going to take this bird out of the roasting pan, lift it and put it over here. I'm going to reclaim my thermometer. You can keep that chicken just in a warm spot. Next to the stove, I would say, is fine. What's left in this pan, if you look, is the cooked mirepoix, but also a little bit of fat and a lot of juices. Those juices are the juices that flowed out of the chicken. So I want to bring them over here, and I'm going to turn this burner on. There we are. And we're going to cook those juices so that the moisture will evaporate. And as the moisture cooks away, the juices themselves will concentrate and ultimately will cling to the bottom of the pan. The reason for doing that is so that once the chicken essence has clung to the pan, then any excess grease can just be poured off. As long as you hear that sizzling, that is the moisture inherent in those pan drippings boiling. And when that sizzling begins to subside, that tells you that the pan is nearly dry. Your job here is just to keep an eye on this process. Don't ever walk away and let those drippings burn, otherwise you have no basis for a gravy. Maybe I'll take these 2 large pieces of celery out. They're just going to get in our way here. While this is cooking down, let me just share an idea with you. I put the chicken in, the oven was at 450 degrees. Imagine what it would have been like if I took the chicken and put it into an oven that was cold and turned the oven to 450 degrees. What you could expect is that it would take a long time, maybe a half an hour, for that oven to come up to temperature. So add another half an hour onto that chicken. The other thing that might happen is that the chicken itself would begin to cook very, very slowly. We wouldn't get the browning on the skin that we're looking for. So make sure at the end of the day that your oven is preheated. So you can see already some of these juices clinging to the side of the pan and the bottom of the pan. I have just a little bit more moisture here. And at this point, if you decided that there was too much fat in this pan, then you could pour some of it off and rest confident that the juices are clinging to the bottom of the pan and they would not be lost. This doesn't look too oily to me. And so what I'm going to do is introduce a little bit of flour. We're going to make a gravy. And the gravy starts with a little bit of roux, which is the fat that's in this pan mixed with the flour. What the fat will do is it'll separate the starch granules so that when we introduce liquid, they don't form lumps. Okay, I've got some chicken stock here, and in goes a little bit. And I want to use this to scrape the drippings from the bottom, deglaze this pan. I also want to take advantage of the thickening of the flour. And as this mixture thickens, I use that texture to break up any lumps that may be forming here. I'll do the same again. Continue to deglaze the bottom of the pan and stir so that there's no lumps. You know, a lump is not the end of the world. We're going to strain this later when we strain out all of the vegetable matter. But it's nice to know that you can get it lump-free if you'd like. Okay, at this point, the pan is deglazed. I've got the chicken essence, and it's relatively lump-free. I'm going to thin it out so that it's slightly thinner than I want my finished gravy to be, so that it can simmer for about 15 or 20 minutes, and the raw flour flavor can cook out. Don't evaluate the consistency of your gravy until after it comes back to a boil. That way you know you have the finished texture or the complete thickening of this sauce. Unless it's boiled, there's no guarantee that the complete thickening has taken place. All right, we're just about there. Okay, this has been cooking now for about 10 minutes. I want to evaluate this viscosity, this thickness, one more time. It looks slightly too thick for the gravies that I like, so I'm going to add a little bit of chicken stock. And it's time for us to strain this sauce. I have a small saucepan and a strainer on top. I'm going to take this whole pan and strain this liquid of all the vegetable matter. So just press on the solids a little bit to make sure that you're not leaving any gravy behind. And that goes over here. And back onto the heat briefly. I want to taste it just to make sure that it's properly seasoned. Still needs a little bit of salt and some pepper. If you love sage gravy, you could put some sage in here as well. That tastes great. Take a look at the texture. Notice that it coats the back of a spoon pretty nicely. That's exactly what you're looking for. That sort of beautiful, velvety sheen and that sort of viscosity. All right, so our sauce is made. Let's see what else we've got in the oven. These look great. I'm going to drain them of the duck fat, but just take a look at that beautiful golden color. If you're curious as to whether or not they're done, just pierce them with a knife, and the knife should go in easily but come out just as easily. I don't want them to sit in this fat, so I'm going to put them into a colander and drain that fat away. And these are ready to go. Here are the peppers that have been roasted, and they look great. I'll set them here on the cutting board. I look for them to be very, very tender, but more than that, I want a little bit of browning around the edges. That really gives you a lot of flavor. So I'm going to scoop these out and put them into a serving plate. Just keep your eye on the colors as you go and make sure that you mix it up a little bit. So we've got green and red and yellow. These taste great at room temperature, so if they're done a little bit ahead, don't worry about it at all. They also make great leftovers. These are delicious in sandwiches with a little bit of tuna. And the little bit of sauce that's collected in the bottom can just get drizzled over the top. And for me, all this needs is a little bit of chopped parsley. We'll set that aside. Let's have a look at our bird. I'm going to cut the twine, and we're going to take the trussing off of this bird. That has served its purpose. There we are. And we'll discard that. I'm going to slide this bird right onto the cutting board. If there's any liquid, that can go right into your gravy. I've got a platter to put this bird on, and I think it would look nice if we took these potatoes and put them all around the outside. This chicken could be placed onto this platter whole, and you could carve it at the table with just a little bit of parsley on the potatoes, or you could decide to carve it in the kitchen, and that's what I'm going to do for you right here and now. Let me lift it up and bring it over here. What I want to do is first take the legs off, and you want to cut between the skin that separates the breast from the leg. And once you've opened up a little bit of an opening, you can follow this seam all the way back down and just cut the leg off like that. We're going to do that on both sides. So open up a little seam, press the meat open, and follow the seam all the way down. And then we've got two legs. Then I'm going to turn it around. I want to deal with the breast next. And the breast has a bone that runs right down the middle. On you, it's called a breastbone. Here, it's called a keel bone on a chicken because it looks like the keel of a ship. And I'm going to run my knife down one side of that keel bone. Here at the end is what on you and I is a collarbone, but it's called the wishbone on a chicken. So when you reach that, just push right through it very, very quickly. And what I want to do is follow this chicken, follow around the ribs, and just keep pulling the meat back. Just keep pulling the meat back until you get to the point where you can separate a breast from the carcass. I'll do the same on this side. Maybe it'll be a little easier to see. Cut down between the keel bone and the breast, and then let your knife follow the ribs around. That's the shoulder joint that I just cut through. Here, open it a little bit more, and that we'll set aside. And now I have 2 breasts and 2 legs. Let me take the breasts. I'm just going to cut them one time and bring them over here. I'll take this breast and cut it one time. So now there's 4 pieces of chicken. And then I'll take each leg and cut it into a thigh and a drumstick. And I'll move that over as well. The drumstick will tuck in there. We'll do the same thing for this last leg. I'm going to clean up this platter. I have a little sauce boat, and in there goes our gravy. I'm going to put a little bit of the gravy on top of the chicken. And we've made our way through roasting 101. We've roasted a chicken, we've roasted some potatoes to accompany it, and we've roasted some delicious peppers. This is a great meal. It was all from the oven, and it all is dry heat cooking without fat.